Hold on. Just hit start.
Let me know when I'm ready.
You're good.
Good morning, Team Rare. Thank you guys for tuning in today. Today's guest lecturer is Dr. Cain. He is a performance dietitian for the 11th Air Defense Artillery out at Fort Bliss, Texas. He's a part of the health and holistic health and fitness teams that you hear a lot about that are being distributed out all throughout the Army. So he is going to talk to you today about some nutrition strategies for body weight and body composition to help us get rid of those COVID-15, COVID-10, COVID-5, whatever your COVID number is, all right? So I'm going to let him take over. Thank you guys again for joining.
All right, thank you for the introduction, and looking forward to the opportunity to talk about this. So yeah, I actually have two presentations, so I'll kind of promote myself here. Today I'm talking more about just general body composition, and for a lot of us, we just think body weight. Usually we talk about fat loss, not just weight loss, but also building muscle. So I'm going to focus on that today. Tomorrow, I've got a presentation on nutrition for enhancing performance. It's obviously body composition can enhance performance, but it's really all the other nutritional aspects. So if you're interested in that, be sure to tune in for that one as well. So there's a lot of information in this presentation. I created it kind of as a reference in a way. So in the notes, in the PowerPoint slide that you'll have available, the notes have all the references in case you want to look at more information. I'm going to try to move through it relatively quickly, but if there's anything you want to ask at the end, I'd be glad to elaborate. Otherwise, you got a lot of information you can look at later. All right, so I'm just going to hop right in. Now I'm going to, a lot of the papers that I've put in here are representations of kind of the literature broadly, or their literature reviews. So I try to make this as evidence-based as possible, mixed in with some of my own experience working with soldiers and athletes in the collegiate level. So let's kind of hop in about really running through kind of calories, energy intake, energy output, some other factors that might affect actual body composition that interact with nutrients. So to hop in, energy balance. As much as people sometimes don't want to admit it, calories do count, and there's calories in, calories out. And this is really a good overview of that, is that we eat calories and we don't actually absorb all the calories we eat. It depends on the diet. And one of the things I'm going to stress in this presentation is food quality. So as an example, if you have peanut butter versus peanuts, you chew the peanuts and swallow them, but 15 to 20% of the energy may not be absorbed because they're not fully digested. But if you have something like peanut butter, or especially added sugars, processed oils, things that are really easily digestible, almost pre-digested because of the processing, we will absorb more calories. So eating a more whole food diet, which I'll focus on a little bit, kind of plays a role with this calories not absorbed. But so it's not just what we put in our mouth, it's actually what we absorb in the body. That's the calories in. The calories out is going to be your resting metabolic rate, the energy used to process the nutrients, the thermic effect of eating, physical activity as exercise, and then non-exercise physical activity. We'll touch on each of those throughout the presentation, but that's the framework that I'm going to use to structure the presentation. So any diet that's going to help with weight or fat loss, or just to avoid weight gain, has to have some kind of calorie control. Now, at the top, we have a bunch of popular diets: ketogenic, Whole30, maybe raw food, vegan, vegetarian, low carb, low fat, whatever it is. Those restrict some food choices, which makes it easier to eat less without realizing it. There's intermittent fasting, intuitive eating on the bottom. There's various things where you're either counting calories. You have the if it fits your macros, where food quality may not matter as long as you're actually counting calories. You have a meal plan, Weight Watchers. These all have some aspect of making it easier to eat less. But regardless, the reason I'm spending time on this is because there are some people out there who feel that as long as I eat this or I avoid these foods, I can eat as much as I want and I don't gain weight, or I will lose weight. But ultimately, they are cutting back calories typically without really thinking about it. To move on, say we want to lose fat. We're going to start with the fat loss. Towards the end, we'll talk about some muscle gain. So someone wants to lose fat. What is the optimum rate of fat loss? So there's some research that tries to put a number to the maximum rate of fat loss. About 31 calories of fat per pound of body fat each day. So as an example, if someone's 180 pounds and 10, 15, or 20% body fat, they can lose between 1 and 2 pounds of fat per week. So that's typically why we would say, as a percentage of body weight or just as an absolute number, most people should lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. If they're losing more than that, they're probably going to be losing lean body mass in addition to the fat mass. So people that go on these crash diets and try to lose weight too quickly tend to lose lean body mass as well as fat mass, and we're trying to avoid that. What you'll notice here is the more over fat someone is, the faster they can lose body fat. So if you have someone who's very obese or very overweight, they might be able to lose 3 to 5 pounds per week and have that be mostly fat. But as someone gets leaner, especially at very athletic levels of body fat, 10 to 15%, sub 10% body fat, you might be losing 1/2 to 1 pound a week to really optimize performance and trying to maintain lean body mass while leaning out. So it's just kind of a framework to kind of put a number to how fast people should be losing weight. Here's a nice summary, kind of as a percentage of body weight and absolute numbers, something again, it kind of summarized what I just said. But on the right here, factors that make fat loss harder or easier. And a lot of people some of these are intuitive, some of them people don't think about. So we'll just kind of go through them briefly. The older you are, it's going to be a little bit harder to lose fat. That's for a number of reasons. Typically, older individuals have a little bit less lean body mass. There's some hormonal changes. There's a lot of research that tries to really understand why. We understand some of it, not completely understood, but it does become a little more difficult. Some people will say metabolism slows as we age. Well, metabolism is a very broad term. Typically, people are a little bit less active. They have less body mass. Their hormones that control energy metabolism are slightly different. But the actual resting metabolic rate, or the amount of calories burned during exercise, is fairly consistent with older versus younger individuals, as long as it's matched for lean body mass. So you take someone who's 50, 60 years old with the same lean body mass as someone who's 20, they're going to burn roughly the same amount of calories. Being female, it's a little bit harder to lose weight for a few reasons. 1, testosterone. 2, they're eating less. So say a female eats 2,000 calories to maintain their weight, and a male eats 3,000 calories. If I say cut 500 calories out of your diet, well, 500 calories of 2,000 is a lot harder to deal with than 500 calories coming out of 3,000 calories. So it's a little bit more difficult to have large calorie deficits being a female. Being leaner, as we talked about, the leaner you are, it's harder to lose fat without also losing lean body mass. If someone is not as active, obviously that's going to play a role. We'll come back to activity a little bit later in the presentation. Consistency is a big one. A lot of people don't realize, they think consistent, very consistent, but it's Monday through Friday. That cheat day or the weekend, they eat different. They may not realize, unless they're really conscious about what they're eating, that they can really blow out a week's worth of progress with a few restaurant meals or kind of some quote cheat days on the weekend. And then there's some other issues that become a little more rare, but definitely affect soldiers especially. Stress, disrupted sleep patterns, especially just extended training protocols. So some of these things can play a big role. That's our general framework for we need a calorie deficit, some things that might affect the calorie deficit, making it easier or harder. Let's talk about the actual nutrients themselves, carbs, fats, and proteins. I'm just going to start right off by saying, as much as people love low carb, low fat, and there's kind of this war, that's always what people focus on. If you look at research that matches low fat and low carb diets with the same amount of protein, there's very little or no difference between the outcomes. A lot of studies, the trials say, here's a low fat diet and low carb, just keep your carbs under 50 grams a day, and that's it. And people tend to eat less because low carb tends to be, we'll get to the protein thing in a moment, it tends to be higher in protein because they're focusing more on meats, cheeses, some dairy products typically. And low fats, if people don't find low fat, high protein foods, they tend to have a little bit lower protein. So a lot of the success of low carb diets in these ad lib studies tends to be because people are automatically getting more protein, and protein is going to help improve satiety, reduce appetite. So if you take a low fat diet and you bump up the protein, you get a very similar effect. Part of this is probably related to something called the protein leverage hypothesis. There's a lot of debate over how much this applies to humans, but it does have some role in humans. It's especially prevalent in other animal species. But the idea is, the hypothesis is that organisms will consume nutrients until they reach a certain amount of protein. As protein is one of the more limited resources in nature, it might make sense to have a sort of proteinostat, if you will, to get a certain amount of protein to maintain lean body mass, and then nutrients beyond that, carbs and fats just for energy, are kind of extra. So in the graphic in the upper right, say someone eats low protein foods, they might need to eat quite a bit more compared to on the right there, a high protein food, to get the same amount of protein. But if they get that protein eating what's on the left, they're going to get a lot more calories. And if you look at some information, the pictures at the bottom are the estimates of food supply and food intake for the United States over 1970 to about 2010, 2012. And in general, foods have become higher fat, higher carb with about the same amount of protein. So to get that amount of protein intake has actually maintained itself pretty consistently, but the carb and fat percentage has gone up. And the theory is that a lot of foods are sort of diluted with protein because of added sugars, added oils, a little bit more processing, and so people are eating more. And on the bottom right, if you actually look at intake data, people are eating about 300 to 350 extra calories per day on average, and that would be enough to explain the obesity epidemic. So just kind of an interesting background about why protein may play a role in diets. So one of the foundations of any successful diet is make sure you're getting adequate protein. If clients come to me and they say, I'm really hungry, or I'm snacky, or I'm just not satisfied, typically bumping up the protein plays a big role to help with that. Beyond carbs, fats, proteins, food processing, sometimes what we call food quality, matters more than those nutrients. So this is a really interesting study recently that demonstrated that, where they tried to match, if we see here on the right, they tried to match calories, carbs, fat, protein, sugar, fiber. And so what they did is they took kind of an unprocessed and an ultra processed meal. And if you look on the left, the ultra processed meal, to actually match the volume and fiber of all the fruits and veggies in the unprocessed meal, they have like 3 glasses of lemonade that they put a fiber supplement in, just to make sure they got that same amount of kind of volume and fiber. And even then, the people on and they were told just eat as much as you want till you're satisfied, provided the same meals, same other than processing level. And you see on the graph on the right, the people with the ultra processed diet ate more than the people on the unprocessed diet, and of course they gained some weight because of that. And this was a crossover design, so each person was in each group for, I believe, 2 weeks. So it's really interesting that it demonstrates that food processing may play a big role. One of the things that we see beyond just protein is that fiber plays a big role in general health, but also diet satisfaction, appetite regulation, and whatnot. So as a foundation, high protein, high fiber, which generally means lots of fruits and veggies, get some lean meats, or tofu, beans, and what you add beyond that is going to be higher calorie density carbohydrates and fats to meet the fuel needs of training or your daily lifestyle. But the basis should be some kind of protein, some kind of fruit and vegetable. All right, let's look at some factors that influence energy intake. So we have kind of a framework of what to eat, but let's look at things that actually affect how much of it we eat. So we all are familiar with the modern food environment. We've got restaurants, processed food. This is what a typical pantry and fridge and freezer look like. We go to the checkout and we're the impulse buys. We've got the candies and chips and sodas, and we do know that people are eating these things. In the United States, this is around data from 2009, 63% of calories came from ultra processed foods, and then additional calories came from somewhat processed foods, and of those, many of them are ready to eat, meaning you just open up the bag and eat them, or ready to heat, you just pop in the microwave. So this is unfortunately what a lot of people are eating, and people in the military are really no different. And this is one of the things I have to contend with is convenience, time constraints, and just the fact that people like these foods. So to give a specific definition to what ultra processed means, not modified foods, but formulations made mostly or entirely from substances derived from foods and additives with little, if any, intact food. Pretty much what we see there in the picture. We take wheat, grains, extracted sugar, gums, fibers, even extracted proteins, and we basically reform them into these foods. The problem is there's a lot of research, and people I think know this intuitively. They're, I hate to use the word addictive because there's a lot of debate over if that applies to food, but they activate reward pathways in the brain, and they are what the food industry calls hyper-palatable. They drive their own intake. They generally don't fill you up. They make you want to eat them more, and because they're so rewarding to our brain, they make us crave, I guess, less processed foods, fruits, vegetables, whole meats, less often than the processed counterparts. So this is something that I tend to show shoulders that I work with and say, this continuum of food processing. We have less processed on the right. For example, fruit, we have the apple. Apple sauce is moderately processed. The apple juice, now we've taken out the fiber. It's easier to get, so if you have 100 calories of apple juice, it's not going to keep you as full, and we're going to more rapidly absorb the sugars than if we were to eat the full apple. If you go further, you have something like apple pie, where we not only have the apple in a processed state, but we've added sugar and fat. So we've actually made it more calorie dense. And then of course, there's apple flavored things. And you have the same thing with meat, so chicken versus the chicken nuggets, oatmeal, intact rice, even if it's white rice versus something like a dehydrated grain, or especially crackers and cookies with added fats and oils. So to the extent that someone can eat more towards the left side of this chart, with all their foods, they're going to be healthier, they're going to generally have better, more consistent energy throughout the day, and it's going to help with body composition overall, partly because of food quality and partly just because it's going to be easier to regulate appetite. And we know that food quality matters. There's research on something that typically people might call a whole foods diet. This can be, in fact, if you look at the lower left, it's not just low fat. There's an Eco Atkins, so it's kind of a plant-based low carb diet with whole foods, but it's still low carb. And so whether it's low fat, low carb, a mix of carbs and fats, the food processing matters a lot for general health and performance and really body composition. A lot of health is driven by overweight and obesity. So not only does a whole foods diet or something with more minimally processed foods, I usually say you make 80% of your diet minimally processed whenever possible. Generally speaking, the weight takes care of itself without even really having to count calories. So some other resources regarding food quality at the DFAC, these dining facilities, there's the Go for Green program, and a lot of the foods are labeled as yellow, green, yellow, red for least processed, some processing, and most processed. And the idea is most of your plate should be the green and yellow foods. Occasionally have a red food or make it only a small portion of the plate. And that's a kind of a ballpark without really having to get too much into details for most soldiers that are eating at the DFAC. At the commissary and even other grocery stores, sometimes there are labels on foods where the mark them as low sodium, no sugar added, whole grain. Some of those are not perfect. There's a lot of kind of marketing that goes into some of those, like low fat might have a lot of added sugar, but it is something helpful for people that really don't know where to start. Something I'd like to hand out, and again, the PowerPoint slides have links for resources. So if you actually want to copy this as a PDF, it's in the notes of the PowerPoint slide. So there's the Go for Green shopping list. Basically, you got your vegetables, fruits, grains, proteins, all the food categories, and then examples of fruits, of meats, of beverages that fall in each category. And I basically tell people, I tell my soldiers, eat in the green and yellow, red maybe once a day or only on the weekends, whatever kind of constraints that helps them be flexible, but also have some kind of a plan. And generally speaking, the things that are in the green and yellow categories are less calorie dense and are going to help reduce appetite and keep energy more consistent. So they feel better and they lose weight. Move on, talk about factors influencing energy intake. So with this, though, it's going to be more the nutrition habits and expectations. So food quality, but along with that modern food environment, we have something called the built environment around food, which is the increased accessibility of these convenience foods, 24-hour or drive-through. We've got, impulse buys. A lot of the processed foods are less expensive per calorie. There's a lot of marketing. You go shopping in the mall and you've got restaurants and these places where cookies and pretzels, the smell is everywhere. So as you're shopping, you're driven to maybe go consume those foods. We call this the built environment, and it leads to non-homeostatic eating. So what that means is, instead of just saying, I'm hungry, I'm going to eat, and when I'm not, I won't, and my weight will take care of itself, we know that those processed foods tend to be hyper palatable and override that natural instinct to eat only when we're hungry. They actually make us want to eat more of them, but the environment around those foods tends to drive their eating beyond something, beyond our basic needs. It's more for just, appetite rather than hunger and our impulse and associations with expectations. So let's go through a few examples of what I mean by this. So there's this a great study where they took a review of animal and human studies, and they found that as the variety in a single meal or in the entire diet is increased, that animals and humans eat more food and gain weight. Now, this is largely related to sensory-specific satiety, and people in the food industry, food scientists, know this quite well. They know that if you eat cookies, you want something kind of sweet and crunchy, maybe chewy cookie that's sweet, and then when you're sated on those aspects, maybe you go get a crunchy, savory chip, and then after that, maybe you get something cold and frozen. So there are different aspects of satiety. It's not just that you're done eating food. It's that maybe your satiety for sweetness or savory or cold, hot, spicy, etc. You can still tap into that. I'd like to give the example of Thanksgiving, which is coming up. Everyone, unbutton the top button. You have this great meal, your mashed potatoes, your gravy, or you get everything, and you're totally full. Can't eat another bite. Who wants dessert? Oh, I can have some. So your satiety for those savory meal foods has been met, but your satiety for dessert, sweet foods has not. So this is how snacking and the variety of foods can really make us overeat when we don't want to. This is also called the buffet effect to some extent. So you go to a buffet and you eat one or two things and you're getting full, but man, there's so many options. And research here, looking at buffets, as the number of buffet options increases, people will eat proportionally more food. So think back to those diets that, say you go on a gluten-free diet or vegetarian or low fat, low carb or whatever. If you just take one aspect of food, one category of food, and you eliminate it, you've automatically, without thinking about it, reduced the variety in the diet, and it makes it easier to eat less. As an extreme example, say I took a piece of meat, broccoli, and potatoes. That's fairly nutrient complete. And if I said you can eat as much of these as you want, but that's all you can eat. If you're really hungry, you'll eat it. You can even try to overeat on it. But how long until you go, you know what? I'm just bored of eating this. I'll eat more later, but I really don't want any more. When we could easily eat a slice of pizza, some candy, and whatnot. So any diet that's going to reduce variety, while they're difficult to follow if they're too restrictive, it does help some people eat less without thinking about it or without feeling fully restricted. And if people feel overly restricted, then they tend to fall off diets, binge, and generally gain weight back. Another example, to kind of put this in perspective, you go shopping for some snack foods. It's not just that there are savory and salty and sweet snack foods, it's that you go want to buy Doritos. There are 16 varieties of Dorito, last time I checked, 27 varieties of Pop-Tarts, 29 varieties of Oreo, and this is with most snack food categories, is that there's so many options. If we look at some studies, there's one in rodents, but there's some similar stuff in humans. So this is one of the earlier examples that showed that if you feed mice regular chow, they will gain a little bit of weight as they get older. That's fine, that's normal. But if you feed them chow plus a single palatable snack, they used human snack foods. They provided chocolate, Cheetos, some other things. If you provide just one of those, that's what each of those lines is a different snack food, they'll gain weight, more weight than they would have with just a regular chow. if you provide the child with 3 simultaneous snack foods, so they're done eating the chocolate, then they go to the Cheeto, then they go to the other food, they tend to overeat even more. So in proportion to the number of snack food options currently available at any moment, people are more likely to overeat, even though they're not necessarily hungry. It's that non-homeostatic eating. If we go out to eat, our expectations of what a normal portion size is has been radically changed over the last 50 to 70 years. So restaurants in general, the normalization of drink sizes, burger sizes, fries are all much larger. The portion sizes of snack foods of, any restaurant, there's almost, some restaurants pride themselves on providing gigantic portions. For most people, you could box up half a meal, save it for later, and then eat what's left, and that would be a pretty normal meal. But a lot of people are eating this once or twice a day, and it's very easy to get between 1,000 and 1,500 calories in a single fast food or restaurant meal. But because they're relatively low in vegetables, fruits, minimally processed foods, they're really calorie dense. So if people are just going to eat a certain volume of food, if they eat that volume of food of something more homemade, minimally processed, they're less likely to overeat. If you go out and you eat food that's more processed, or even if it's at home, for the same volume of food, you're going to pack in a lot more calories. So last example here, this one is fantastic. I'm not sure we could still do this research today, but at one point, this is late 90s, they took 2 densely amnesic patients who had such extensive memory loss that they typically forgot that they just ate. And so they did this experiment where they took these 2 patients and they fed them a lunch. And then about 30 minutes later, they said, hey, it's lunchtime, let's eat. And they fed them another lunch. They ate the entire meal. And then 30 minutes later, they said, hey, it's lunchtime. They fed them a third meal. Partway through the third meal, they actually didn't finish it. But the fact that they could eat a full meal and get all the way through the second and partway through the third, just because it was an expectation, oh, it's lunchtime. There was no pressure for them to eat it. It was just, it's lunchtime and that's what we do. Obviously, this is a very unique example, but a lot of people consume food specifically because it's an expectation. It's mealtime, it's lunch, it's dinner. So we have ideas of what breakfast foods should be, what snack foods should be. And unfortunately, a lot of this is due to marketing, due to social expectations. And there's a recent paper that just came out actually this month, appetitive traits as targets for weight loss. Basically, they're saying that a diet plan may not be enough, but behavior change around nutrition habits, our expectations, our response to cues. If you're walking through the mall and you smell, pizza, to go, it smells like pizza, but I'm not hungry, so I'm going to keep going. Whereas unconsciously, we're more likely to go, oh man, I can go for something now. And then you're just thinking about food, and so or if you see a snack food at home, like part of it's setting up a positive environment as well. If you leave cookies on the counter, you're more likely to eat the cookies. If you leave apples on the counter, you're more likely to eat the apples. But just because you see food, you should be able to assess, am I hungry? Do I want it? And be more conscious about your food environment and navigating it. And the reason I'm focusing so much on this is I would say about half of what I do with a lot of my clients is not just here are the things you should focus on eating, but here's how to think about eating. Because a lot of people haven't thought about it, or they do think about it, but they have trouble resisting the marketing, the expectations, and so it's one of those things that behavior change is a necessary component for a lot of people if they're going to have a healthy body composition long term. Let's move on, talk about factors influencing energy expenditure with relation to metabolic adaptations, exercise, and building some muscle mass. So we have that same calories in, calories out equation, but if you look at the calories in component, typically people say, I'm going to drastically eat less calories, but typically that can lead to an increase in all these other factors. So if you eat less calories, your body will try to absorb more of, be more efficient with its digestion. Food moves a little slower through the GI tract. You're more likely to get more calories out of what you do eat. It's not a large amount, but it might play a role. but then the calories outside. So we know that if people lose substantial amounts of weight, and this is very individual, a little bit it's genetically determined, part of it depends on the body fat percentage and lifestyle before the person lost the weight. There's a lot of factors, but in general, a lot of people will respond with substantial weight loss with an increase in hunger. So there's a decrease, so appetite regulating hormones are modified so that you're a little hungrier, you have a bit more of an appetite. Thyroid hormones, T3, T4, testosterone, some of these hormones drop, and especially with very large calorie deficits, and that can make it more difficult to actually be energetic and expend calories. So if someone is going to exercise, they tend to exercise less intensely or not as long. And even when they're not exercising, instead of sitting up straight, maybe fidgeting, they might slouch in their chair a little bit. And so over the course of the day, this adds up. And so they're burning less calories. So they might cut back their calories 300 to 500 calories a day, very moderate, and their body might try to save 100 to 200 calories, just by being a little more metabolically efficient, burning less calories during exercise. Obviously, if you're not eating as much, there's a bit lower thermic effect of food. And so you can't just say, oh, I cut back, if a pound of fat is 3,500 calories, if I cut back 500 calories a day, I'll lose a pound a week. Well, after your body adapts to that, it might not be a full pound that you lose. And so some people are frustrated by this. So over here on the right, there's actually, I put a little science in here, some metabolism. So the mechanism for the increased mitochondrial efficiency. So people say your metabolism slows down. This is probably the best approximation of what that might actually mean. So when we metabolize carbs, fats, and proteins, we put them through the Krebs cycle, and we get these reducing equivalents. So really we're stripping hydrogens and their electrons off of those molecules and transporting them to the electron transport chain. So at the bottom there, we have this proton gradient that we push all the protons to one side, and they try to force themselves through this enzyme called ATP synthase to actually get usable energy as ATP. Or those protons can leak through an uncoupling protein because it uncouples energy production from the gradient, and instead we produce heat. So we waste, effectively waste the calories from carbs, fats, and proteins as heat instead of usable energy. So if you overeat, you may find yourself getting warmer. If you undereat, then you lose substantial amounts of weight. If you notice that you're colder more often, some of that's just going to be you're eating less food, less thermic effective feeding, but on a kind of metabolic mitochondrial level, you may be more efficient. And so that might be a 5 to 10% efficiency in some people. It seems to be genetically influenced. There's not a lot known about it. It's one of the targets of future medications to try to combat weight loss. Not sure how effective that would be, but it is something. So it's kind of what the background explanation that's probably the best one we have so far. This is a more advanced concept that a lot of athletes and coaches are trying to take advantage of to offset this metabolic adaptation. So something called diet breaks. And so here, there's a paper fairly recently, and this is kind of in the past 5 years, is one of the areas of sports nutrition research where we're trying to go. But typically what we see is that athletes and coaches try stuff out about 5 years ahead of the research. So a lot of athletes are kind of anecdotally saying this works for them. The research seems to suggest that it might work, depends on the population. Are they training? Are they advanced? Are they not? But we'll know more later. But here's the idea. Here's maintenance calories, this dotted line. And so people eat at their maintenance calories. If they want to lose weight, they cut their calories down for a few weeks. And instead of staying in this consistent calorie deficit, every so often, maybe 1 week per month, they come back up to maintenance calories. Now, this is not a cheat day. This isn't like some people call it like a refeed or they don't go over their maintenance. A lot of people will go over their maintenance calories and then drop back down, go over their maintenance calories. And that's just going to make the overall average calorie deficit not as much. So by just eating at maintenance, it's going to, the theory is that it's going to help restore appetite and metabolic hormones, ghrelin, leptin, thyroid hormones, testosterone. people that are in constant energy deficit for months at a time, especially if it's severe calorie deficit, have much greater negative impacts metabolically. So it's thought that by relieving that calorie deficit, and not just a weekend, but maybe like 1 week a month, that it might help over time allow that person to maintain, avoid the metabolic efficiency and hormonal adaptation to weight loss. So it's something that a lot of athletes are trying. At the very least, it's kind of a nice mental break to say, I'm going to diet for 2-3 weeks, take 1 week at maintenance. So I'm not regressing, I'm just maintaining for a week. That also teaches athletes and people in general that maintenance is the end goal. A lot of people go into this thinking, I'm just going to diet, and then I'm not. And of course, when they're not, they're eating a lot, drinking a lot, they gain weight back, and then they got to diet again. So this teaches the individual that once I usually say, if I could wave my magic wand and you wake up tomorrow at your goal weight and body composition, what are you eating? What's that maintenance diet? What's that exit strategy? Have that already in mind, because when you feel like, man, this diet isn't working and you just want to stop, instead of going and overeating on foods or that you've been restricting or other things, that you just go, okay, I'm done with the diet, I'm just going to go to maintenance. So at least there's never a regression. And so there is kind of a psychological benefit to this as well. All right, so back to this final component. So we want to lose body fat, lose body weight. We're told to eat less, but also move more. Now, if someone is going to move more, so by dramatically increasing the physical activity, maybe they want to out-train a bad diet without, they're like, I don't diet, I just go run a bunch or something. The body tries to constrain its overall calorie balance. And if you expend a lot of calories through physical activity, it tends to reduce your non-exercise activity. It might reduce your metabolic rate a little bit. It also will make you a little bit hungrier or more likely to overeat. So to some extent, just exercising to lose weight, while it can be helpful for a lot of people, it's generally not the best approach. So there's a great article by Vox actually that has a cool video and a bunch of explanations for this, more for the lay individual, but they have these great graphics. This is the linear model of energy expenditure, where people think that if this is my energy expenditure at rest, I don't exercise, and as my physical activity increases, my calorie expenditure is just going to go up with exercise. So I can run a bunch and have a huge calorie deficit. Where typically what we actually see is that if you go from nothing to some exercise, yeah, you'll burn more calories. As you go from some exercise to progressively more and more exercise, it starts to, your total daily energy expenditure doesn't seem to go up as much, because the body tries to constrain energy through these other mechanisms so that the total calorie expenditure doesn't get too great. Now, obviously, if you're kind of marathoner or you're really fit, you're kind of professional athlete level, yeah, you can push calorie expenditure high enough that you just need to eat some calories, maybe 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 calories a day. But for the average person, some exercise is good, but they're not going to out-exercise a diet, kind of a poorly planned diet. The other thing is, if someone tries to over-exercise to burn calories, there's risk of overtraining, burnout, injury, soft tissue injuries. So again, it's usually not recommended. Someone does want to gain muscle mass. They want to exercise, and usually what we hear is, well, strength training is great because it builds muscle mass, and that will increase your resting metabolic rate, so you just eat more calories. Yes and no. So here is the typical rates of energy expenditure for resting metabolic rate to sustain various tissues in the body. And we see that skeletal muscle is only about 13 calories per kilogram. So what that means is, if you're going to gain 10 pounds of pure muscle, which is a lot, that's about 60 calories extra per day that you're going to burn just to maintain that 10 pounds of muscle. So for an average person being very diligent, that might be a year of great strength training and nutrition, just to burn an extra 60 calories a day at rest. Most of our energy expenditure comes from our major organs. However, the caveat is muscle mass greatly increases exercise energy expenditure. So if someone is going to build muscle, any exercise they do with that muscle, even small daily tasks like yard work or whatever, are going to burn more calories. This kind of brings me back to there's kind of a side component. I'll talk a little bit more about actually my talk tomorrow about performance. Is some people think I'm going to eat a certain amount of calories each day, and they don't take into account that, especially if they're doing any kind of athletic training or depending on their PT program, their field exercises, is 1 week or 1 day might be significantly more energy intensive than the next day. And a lot of people don't think that on energy intensive days, I need to eat more. But even if they're very muscular, if they're just kind of sitting on the couch on a rest day, they might not need very many calories, but they're still eating a lot. So a lot of people don't take into account that periodized nutrition to match energy needs to their expenditure. That's a more of an advanced concept, but it does play a role for some people. All right, realistic rates of muscle gain per month. So someone says, okay, that's fine, but body composition, energy aside, I just want to gain muscle. I don't have an issue with body fat. So what we see here in this chart is that the fitness level, so if someone is a total beginner to strength training, they can gain quite a bit of muscle mass. If someone becomes more advanced, an intermediate lifter, they've been lifting for 2 to 5 years, or an advanced lifter, they've been doing serious strength training for maybe 3, 4, 5 or more years, depending on their training program. As someone becomes more advanced with fitness and more muscular, it becomes progressively more difficult to gain additional muscle mass. So if you take a lot of soldiers who are, they've been doing PT, working out, some of them lift on their own, and they're, fairly muscular. Even if they have excessive body fat, they're still muscular. And they might only be able to gain about 1 pound per month or less possibly of muscle. So these people are like, I'm going to go on this, 3-month, 20-pound bulking cycle. You're going to gain you're going to gain maybe 3 or 4 pounds of muscle, and then you're going to gain about 15 pounds of fat. That's just biology. And, it really takes consistent, slow weight gain to ensure that the weight gain comes from lean body mass and not also fat mass. So that might be, you're looking at 10 to 12 pounds per year for most intermediate, relatively fit lifters. So let's think back to the body fat. As someone gets leaner, they have to slow down their weight loss or else they're going to lose more lean body mass instead of fat mass. And as they get more muscular, they have to gain weight slower or else they're going to risk gaining body fat. So as someone becomes leaner, fitter, more muscular, any rate of change is significantly slower. So a lot of people will make a lot of progress in the first year or two. And after that, you look at those people that are very muscular or very lean, very fit, that's generally 5 to 10 years of consistent diet and training that meets these principles. All right, this is chart on the right, very similar to the fat loss one. Factors that make muscle gain harder or easier. This thing with being older, there's something called anabolic resistance. You can kind of overcome that by smart training and a little bit extra protein, a little bit more than might be recommended anyway. We're going to move into the protein recommendations here in a moment. But obviously, as you get a little bit older, testosterone's a little bit lower. It takes a little bit more protein in your diet to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. It's also a little bit harder to recover from any kind of little injuries. So progress is going to be a little bit slower, once you're 40, 50 plus. We call those masters athletes. Obviously, being female for similar reasons, as testosterone being the big one, but similar to the body fat ones. Otherwise, it's pretty much if you take someone who is relatively new to lifting, and they're younger and they're male, it's going to be a little bit easier to gain weight. A few big things. Sleeping plays a big role. I'll talk about sleep a little bit later. Stress, we know that people in general, especially soldiers, have a lot of stress, and stress and sleep. I mean, I'm amazed at the number of soldiers that seem to perform relatively well, and they tell me they get 4 to 6 hours of sleep a night. And I'm just thinking, if you just got even 1 or 2 extra hours, you could be so much better with your progress with fitness. But it comes with the territory. And then of course there's some other things, health, medications might play a role. That's a little more advanced. All right, protein recommendations. The best up-to-date research is that if someone is engaging in heavy strength training, 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight of protein is going to be what they need. So if someone weighs 140 to 200 pounds, that's about 100 to 145 grams per day. Now, you see here at the bottom, people that are more muscular or that have significantly more intense training, especially if they're doing muscular training as well as conditioning work, sprinting, runs, kind of almost like a multi-sport athlete, which is what a lot of soldiers do, especially those that are in special forces. Up to 2.2 grams per kilogram is going to be more helpful. So that actually works out to be about 1 gram per pound of body weight. So 0.7 to 1 gram is where most people should be with a relatively intense training program most days of the week. The distribution of that protein plays a role as well. So 4 meals is probably optimal. 3 is okay. You know, if you're eating more than 5 meals, it's personal preference. There's no additional benefit. If you're eating 2 meals, you're probably sacrificing some potential recovery. So 3 to 4, maybe 5 meals is optimal. So 4, that comes out to be about 25 to 36 grams of protein per meal. A lot of people have trouble reaching that unless they eat a lot of meat. But there are other sources. Protein powder is helpful, but otherwise just proper planning. You can easily do this with whole food. So who should eat more protein? We kind of mentioned higher intensity training, more frequent training. If there's a new training stimulus, that third point is going to be very important. If someone is in a calorie deficit, additional protein towards that higher end of the range is going to help someone preserve their muscle mass while they're in a calorie deficit losing body fat. And the leaner someone is, so in fact, if you look at pro bodybuilders who are very lean and relatively muscular, you're looking at the evidence suggests that protein intakes of even 2.5 to 3 grams per kilogram might be necessary. Now, very few people fall in that category, but just to kind of show that the more muscular someone is and the leaner they are, if they do want to kind of lose that last little bit of body fat, they really need a higher protein diet. All right, body recomposition. Can you build muscle and lose fat at the same time? And really, as this article is trying to get at, is can trained individuals do it? So we know that if someone is relatively new to strength training and they're over fat, it's very easy for that individual to lose fat and build muscle at the same time. As someone gets more advanced in their training, they become a little bit leaner, more muscular, their fitness is higher, it becomes a little bit more difficult to, at the same time, lose fat and build muscle. You can do it, but they say in the article, once you get to a certain point, it's not just nutrition, but you've got to have a relatively low stress lifestyle. You have to have 8+ hours of sleep. You have to be very diligent with the nutrient timing and making sure you're very consistent with the diet every day. So what a lot of people do is they tend to do like, I'm going to spend the next 3 months gaining a little bit of muscle mass and maybe a little bit of fat at the same time. And I'm going to spend the 3 months after that losing a little bit of body fat and trying to just maintain the muscle rather than moving both levers at once. So it's possible, even in trained individuals, it's just, you got to be very slow progress and diligent with it. All right, a few more considerations, and these are very, very kind of fun and interesting. Sleep, circadian rhythms, and supplements. All right, sleep restriction. So what they did in this study, and there are many like this, they put these people, now these people were not strength training or exercising, it was just a general weight loss study. But they had one group time in bed 8.5 hours or time in bed 5.5 hours. They lost very similar amounts of body weight, but the people that were sleep restricted lost significantly more muscle mass or lean body mass, and they lost less fat mass. So it's not just about weight loss, it's what's the quality of that weight loss. Now, there is a recent paper that was published, I want to say a few months ago maybe, that actually had a group strength training and sleep restricted. And they didn't follow body composition, I don't think, but they did show that markers of muscle protein synthesis were maintained if someone was strength training during sleep restriction. I don't know what the long-term effect of that would be on body composition, so it's possible that someone's strength training might be able to overcome sleep restriction to some extent. The problem with that is if you're sleep restricted, it's also harder to have intense quality workouts over time. But there's a lot of evidence that shows whether you're gaining or losing body mass, if you're sleep restricted, it's going to be working against you as far as the fat and lean portions. The other interesting aspect of this research is they found that those people who are sleep restricted had enhanced adaptations to calorie restriction, so that that metabolic adaptation, the kind of slow down, the appetite that increases with weight loss, all seem to be enhanced with sleep restriction. And something that's very common is that when people are sleep restricted, the appetite regulation pretty much goes out the window. So your brain is wired to be more hungry, and it's sensitized to high calorie density, high sugar, high fat foods. So, if you're sleep restricted, you're more likely to say, I don't really want like the potato and steak. I want snack foods. I want sugar. We kind of want that dopamine hit. We want the quick energy. So sleep restriction makes it difficult to follow a diet that's going to help with body composition. And then, of course, this study shows that body composition might be upset separate from the calories anyway if you're sleep restricted. All right, when we eat matters. There's a lot of interest in intermittent fasting, where people will typically compress their eating into a small period each day. So maybe they compress all their eating into an 8-hour or a 6 or even a 4-hour window. Typically this is, I'm going to skip breakfast, I'm going to have a lunch or maybe a snack, and then a big dinner, and then after dinner I'm not eating. So that I'm eating all my calories between like a 6-hour window and like lunch and dinner. And you can eat kind of whatever you want. And the idea is if you skip a few meals, even though you're going to eat bigger meals when you do eat, you're not going to make up for those meals that you did skip. Socially speaking, this is easier to skip breakfast and have dinner with friends and family and go out and whatnot. Unfortunately, there's a lot of research looking at circadian biology that shows that it's actually better to get calories earlier in the day, because we're more likely to use those for glycogen replenishment, muscle protein synthesis. The thermic effect of eating is a little bit higher if you eat foods earlier in the day. Our insulin sensitivity is better in the first half of the day. So generally speaking, eating more earlier in the day is better. But let's get into some examples. So I have two of them here. One, they did an observational study, 420 participants. This is in the Mediterranean. So they set a lunch cutoff time as 3 o'clock. And basically what they're saying is, are you getting breakfast and lunch before 3? Or is that lunch after 3 o'clock? In which case, lunch and dinner are both after 3 o'clock. So are you getting basically half of your calories earlier in the day, or are you eating them more later in the day? And they found that for similar energy intake, dietary composition, carbs, fats, proteins, total energy expenditure through exercise, sleep duration, all that was matched. And so presumably everything should be the same, but those people that ate more of their calories earlier in the day lost much more weight over time. And not a small amount. It's a pretty significant difference over this time period. An intervention where some researchers took overweight and obese women. They gave them 2 diets. They're both very low calorie, 1,400 calorie diets. Over 3 months, they said, eat a big breakfast, moderate lunch and small dinner, or eat a small lunch or a small breakfast, moderate lunch and big dinner. Same meals, same calories, same nutrients. They just switched big breakfast or big dinner. And what they found was those people that had the bigger breakfast lost more weight for the same amount of calories. Their waist circumference was smaller. Presumably they lost more of that central obesity, that central adiposity. There was a meal challenge, and they found that those people that matched to their eating, their typical eating schedule, and they found that those that were eating breakfast over the course of the day, they had lower glucose, lower insulin, their triglycerides dropped significantly. So not only is it metabolically healthier, but it also led to more weight loss and presumably more fat loss. So something to think about when people are intermittent fasting, that perhaps might be difficult, but eat breakfast and lunch and skip dinner. It's probably socially hard, but possibly there might be some long-term benefits if that's something someone wanted to do. I said I'd talk about supplements. Everyone wants to talk about supplements, so I just created a little text slide here. Just want to cover a few basic concepts here. The first part's going to be effective weight loss supplements. Second part's for muscle building. So I didn't list weight loss supplements because there really aren't that many that are effective. What I did was I listed the mechanism by which a weight loss supplement could be effective. So if something's going to help you eat less or burn more calories, it's got to do one of these 5 things. It has to reduce your appetite and thus make it easier to eat less. So any kind of anorectic. Increase physical activity amount or intensity. Stimulants typically fall in this category. Increase your resting metabolic rates. So thermogenics. So basically increase that like uncoupling protein activity or possibly through some other mechanisms. Possibly impair nutrient absorption, so that even though you're eating the nutrients like carb blockers or fat blockers, you're just going to basically poop out the nutrients instead of getting them in your body, and therefore you don't get those calories. And then I put in italics because technically it kind of goes into weight loss, but any kind of diuretic that makes you lose water weight. Now this might dehydrate you. It's very temporary. It's not permanent actual weight loss as fat loss, but it can have a lower scale rate. There are some prescription level medications that will reduce appetite. Some of these work by like cannabis and basically, marijuana and cannabinoids can increase appetite and food intake. They said, well, what if we turn around and we block that? Well, it works. It blocks, it kind of reduces people's appetite. Unfortunately, it can lead to heart problems. Interestingly, stimulants, they can work, but again, excessive use can lead to heart problems. Thermogenics is a little bit more difficult. Impairing nutrient absorption seems to be effective, but the problem is you might miss out on vitamins and minerals absorption that are passed along with those carbs and fats. There's one called, I think, Ally. I think it used to be over the counter, it still might be. It would basically reduce fat absorption. So if you're not absorbing fat, you can get greasy stools. It's like a steatorrhea, not fun. If you block carbohydrate absorption, the carbohydrates make their way further into the colon, gut bacteria will ferment them. It has an osmotic laxative effect and gas and diarrhea. So they come with, all these come with side effects. Typically, so weight loss supplements, generally, I would never recommend those as a first-line treatment for general population. Let's move down to effective muscle building supplements. This is a little more interesting. There are some things here. So creatine is very popular. It's one of the most studied supplements. It's very safe in most individuals. As long as there's no pre-existing kidney failure, it seems to be just fine. And this is great for improving maximum effort, less than 30 seconds duration. So maximum sprinting, maximum weightlifting. And the idea is it doesn't actually make you stronger, but it allows you to, say you do a 100-pound bench press for 10 reps, and that's your 100% effort. You cannot get that 11th rep. If you take creatine, you might be able to get 11 or 12 reps. So the idea is it doesn't make you stronger, but allows you to train a little bit longer at that intensity and thus derive a greater training effect and muscle hypertrophy. Beta-alanine, it's very similar. It's an acid-base buffer basically, and so it's more for like prolonged, more intermediate intensity, like the sprinting for 30 seconds to 2 minutes, possibly up to 10 minutes depending. So this is going to be really high intensity stuff. We're not talking like go for a 2 to 10 mile run, but more repeat sprints, running an 800 or 1 mile as fast as possible. So there's some evidence that can help. And again, a lot of those activities are very high muscular intensity and thus may drive muscular building just because of the increased work capacity. But creatine has some unique ability to possibly also recruit muscle satellite cells, so stem cells that can enhance muscle protein synthesis and muscle building. And then of course, the rest honestly just fall into protein supplements. So you have essential amino acids, branched chain amino acids, individual amino acids like leucine, but really none of those matter as long as you're getting enough total protein. So if you're just taking a protein supplement, we're getting that 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein per body weight each day, split up over 3 to 4 meals. For the most part, specific amino acid supplements don't provide a lot of extra benefit, but it really just depends on the specific athlete. But they're convenient, and if people use these supplements, you can get protein from whole food, but a lot of people just find it convenient, especially if they're going to run out to the car and grab a a granola bar and a protein shake, it's better than just the granola bar. So it's better than nothing for a lot of individuals. All right, so real quick, I'm just going to talk about constructing a meal. And so how I might, this is kind of like the end of what I might give someone as a take-home template for eating. So it of course takes into account a lot of those things that we talked about, especially right at the beginning regarding food quality. So this is what the military uses as in their warfighter nutrition guide, the power plate. And this is actually adapted from the US Olympic Committee. And what we see here is, as a typical meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, about a quarter of the plate should be protein, a quarter should be some kind of a higher carb, grain or starchy vegetable, and a quarter should be some kind of vegetable. And then this last quarter is either going to be more vegetables or more high carb foods, depending on the training needs. If someone has a really big exercise day planned for tomorrow or later in the afternoon, maybe half your plate or a little bit more than half, a little bit more than a quarter should be higher carb foods so that your muscle glycogen stores can be topped off. If you got a relatively lazy day and you're not burning a lot of calories, you just increase the veggie content. And what that's going to do is allow you to eat the same quantity of food, but the overall calorie density is lower. For a lot of people that want to lose weight, which is the majority of my clientele, typically we will start with something like half of your meals should be fruits and veggies, and then some kind of relatively wholesome grain or carbohydrate, fruits, potatoes, corn, whatever, and then some kind of lean protein source, be it meat or plant-based. Fat is usually not emphasized because a lot of proteins, especially meats, tofus, already have fats in them. Cooking the veggies or grains might have some fat, but if all those are very low fat, then adding some additional olive oil, avocado, some nuts or seeds is certainly helpful. So this is very similar to the general recommendations for the United States public, the dietary recommendations as the My Plate, but it's kind of adapted for athletes and people with varying energy needs day by day. So this quarter up here allows athletes to match their energy intake to their demand. Typically, we tell them to reduce liquid calories because it's liquid calories tend not to promote satiety as much as eating those calories, and metabolically, it's not as healthy. Obviously, sports drinks or juice can be helpful if someone is burning a lot of calories and it's just hard to eat that much. Example of what this will look like in practice, each of these is 1/2 fruits and vegetables, a quarter grain, a quarter protein. So these are all great examples if someone wants some ideas. Even if they don't want the specific, I have a pile of vegetables, a piece of meat, pile of grains or something, these are all also, roughly 1/4 to 1/2 vegetables. So whether you're making pasta or eggs or stuffed peppers, chili, you can always add more vegetables. And so by doing that, a lot of times I say, step one, before we even get into anything serious, like fist-sized portion of fruit or vegetable at each of your main meals. Just do that for 2 weeks, come back and let me know how you feel. And that usually starts the process. They're eating less and it gets them used to being creative with vegetables with no other specific goal. So kind of starting small. So one of the basic principles is start with the minimum necessary. Don't totally flip the diet and try to do too much, or it generally is hard to stick with. This is a great meal plan template. A lot of things I've taken from today graphic-wise are from this website called Precision Nutrition. I don't get any support by them. They do have paid programs, but a lot of their content is free, including the stuff I've used in this presentation. And they do evidence-based dietary recommendations as well as behavior change. But this is a meal, kind of a meal plan template that they provide. And this is honestly what, if you look at private dietetic services, what universities are doing, what I do, pretty much what most meal plans that people ask for, this is roughly what you're going to get. Not too many people do it too much differently, unless the specific dietary choices are, like someone wants to be lower carb or gluten-free, but otherwise the template is similar. The idea is you start with step one, you got some protein. Men on the left obviously need a little bit more than women on the right there. So for men, maybe a palm-sized portion. We try to avoid, a tablespoon, a cup, because it's hard to measure what that is. So we just use the hand as a guide. So if you take your palm minus the fingers and thumb, and about that thickness as well, Now, if you're a larger individual, you probably need more calories. Your palm's probably bigger. If you're smaller, your palm is probably smaller. So it kind of follows, your needs a little bit. So maybe, depending on male or female or your body size, regardless of gender, 1 to 2 palms. Vegetables, a fist size or 2 fist size portions. Carbohydrates. Now these are going to be like relatively whole grains or minimally processed grains, starches, beans, fruits. So we're not talking, trying to avoid a lot of the highly processed things that are more calorie dense. But, basically cup your hand and imagine you were to scoop your hand in a bucket of rice or something. That much is about a cupped handful. So 1 to 2 of those. And then fats. Just take your a thumb-sized portion of maybe added oils or butter, maybe some nut butter, peanut butter, almond butter, or just the nuts themselves and seeds, or maybe a high-fat condiment like ranch or something to get some fat. And part of that depends on the cooking methods for the vegetables and carbohydrates. But this will put people in a range that is probably going to meet their needs. So for males, 2,300 to 3,000 calories per day. Females 1,200 to 1,500. And then if you need more or less food because maybe you have higher training demands or it's too much to eat or you're still hungry or you're not getting results or you're gaining weight, then you can either add or remove some things. So typically we say keep the protein the same, keep the vegetables the same, cut back 1 portion of carbohydrates or fats, and then if you're hungry, you can add in another portion of vegetables. And if that's not working, cut out both a carb and a fat. So you've got 1 of each, or maybe a half portion for females. And then you can always add protein and especially vegetables to kind of fill you up. And this is how most generic non-calorie counting, without tracking carbs, fats, proteins, or grams per day or calories, this is a good ballpark. I'm all for counting calories. In fact, I have a lot of my clients that, I say, even if you don't want to, count calories, measure out food for 1 week, just to get an idea of how many calories are in certain things, just to improve your awareness. And typically they come back, they go, man, I didn't realize chips have that many calories. And like, I don't get full from eating them. Or, wow, like an apple only has like 80 to 100 calories, like it's huge. I can barely eat one, so it just helps improve their nutrition literacy. But I also say, you want to count calories. A lot of people like that control, and that's fine. But I usually say, in 10 years, in 20, in 50 years, are you still counting calories? And a lot of people are like, no. So then what are you doing? So if you want to count calories, that's great. But having some kind of structured approach like this meal plan is usually what I have people think about long-term where they will end up, even if they're counting calories now. So I will finish up real quick here with this slide and one more. Pretty much the I can't lose weight, but I'm doing everything right. Typically, I'll really quickly run through these. They do not account for alcohol and beverages. They have too many ultra-processed foods or restaurant meals, even if it's on the weekends. They may not realize that they're getting as many calories as they are to offset what they're doing during the week. They're underestimating intake or portion size, and they're actually think they're eating less than they are. Hidden calories, especially things like added sugars and oils and condiments or while cooking. Like say you want to saute something, it doesn't take that much oil, but some people put a few large glugs of oil in the pan. That could be an extra 200-300 calories without realizing it. They're much more sedentary than they might think, or they know they have a desk job. Maybe you work out for 45 minutes in the morning and then you sit all day. That's going to play a role. Poor sleep, evening eating patterns like we talked about, and then some secondary factors. These are less common, but I do occasionally need to dip into these. A history of chronic undereating. So if someone is extremely calorie restricted and very inactive, their metabolism is quite slow and they generally are relatively, under muscled. And so it takes kind of some more advanced planning to try to slowly increase their metabolic rate back to kind of a maintenance level. And then sometimes people have issues with thyroid hormones or other hormones. Certain medications, genetics, certain chronic inflammatory diseases can make it more difficult. Those are a little more advanced, but those are some things that may play a role. But 90% of the population that has trouble losing weight, it's one of the primary factors. So last slide here. This is just a summary you can take home. It's pretty much everything I've said. And this graphic sums up as well that regardless of what diet you choose, if you want to even choose a diet, some people just eat food, whatever sounds good, just make sure the quality's high. But if you just find it easier to eat one of these prescribed diets, they all still emphasize whole foods, getting enough protein, getting enough vegetables, high nutrient density food, so it goes back to the minimal processing, eating slowly until satisfied, and just other behavioral strategies to try to be aware of your food environment and what's actually going to make you feel good after eating it, and minimizing the processed foods most of the time. Ultimately, if you don't like your diet, you're not going to stick with it. A lot of people can do some really serious stuff, really high calorie deficits, really restrictive eating for like 2 weeks, maybe a month. But you got to think, if I'm doing that, it's not permanent. What is my maintenance plan when I reach my goal? And that's generally a good place to default when everything else fails. So that would be it. So I really appreciate your attention, and hopefully there was something interesting in there for you. And if there are any questions, I'd be welcome to expand on anything or answer any other side questions someone might have. Oh, I'm sorry. Apparently sharing my screen muted, so I stopped sharing the screen. So I'm sorry. I just am now catching anything that might come in.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So there's in the Q&A, there's a ton of questions for you. If you go up to the top right.
I have live event Q&A, and it's
yeah.
not published. Here we
Yep.
go. Okay. All right, let me work through some of these. Just from the top here. Does sodium impact weight loss? Not directly, because sodium does not have calories. Some foods that are higher in sodium, sometimes a little bit easier to overeat. Sometimes people will crave high sodium foods more. But directly, no, there's no calories. It doesn't directly affect weight loss. In the sense of fat loss. If someone is sensitive to sodium, they may retain a little bit of water, but that's not a permanent weight gain. All right, number 2, what labels should we look for to make sure it isn't processed? The quick things are look for sugar content. If there's a lot of added sugar, that certainly plays a role. Depending on the food, you can try to say, no more than 5 grams of added sugar per snack or something. Being aware of how much sugar is in things is important. Fiber is also a really good. What I usually tell people is if you want like a snack. Now meals are a little bit easier. For snacks, I usually say make sure your snack has about 8 grams of protein and 3 grams of fiber, and glass of milk and a piece of fruit, some string cheese and some whole grain crackers, peanut butter and celery. Those all will fit the bill. A bag of chips, candy bar, Gatorade do not have protein or fiber, so that's kind of one way you can go about ballparking it. Otherwise, looking at the ingredients themselves and just trying to, I think it's a little more advanced, but that's something you could try to do. How does cooking vegetables change its nutrients? I actually talked to this yesterday. I talked yesterday about this with someone. So someone thought that they needed to eat a lot of salads and raw vegetables. There's actually there's some interesting research. They've looked at it. They said, let's provide vegetables as raw or vegetables as cooked, follow 2 groups, look at measures of antioxidants and oxidative stress and general other some health markers, blood pressure, whatnot. And they found that basically there's no difference. If you eat any vegetables, it's good. So cooking, the heat can destroy some nutrients, but it also converts other ones. Like for example, lycopene in tomatoes. That's only created during the heat and processing. So tomato paste, cooked tomatoes, tomato sauce has more lycopene. Raw tomatoes, not as much. So it's one of those things where, as long as you're not destroying the vegetables by cooking them to, char, pretty much any vegetables is fine. So you're going to be good either way. Is it really okay to eat sugar-free food since they are usually more processed and have artificial sweeteners? If it's sugar-free and does not have artificial sweeteners, isn't as processed, that'd be the best. If something is sugar-free, so artificial sweeteners, that's kind of a contentious area. There's some evidence that people that consume artificial sweeteners tend to still crave sweet things. And if you're trying to do more of a behavior change where you like sweet things, but you kind of want to desensitize yourself to that sweet craving, avoiding artificial sweeteners might be helpful. It's very individual. Some people, if they're like, I'm going to have a sweet tooth and I'm going to eat some sugar or artificially sweetened things, either way, I need some sweetness. Artificial sweeteners are going to be better for them because they're just going to lose the excess fat. If someone does not have that issue, I would suggest trying to, if you can, avoid or limit excessive artificial sweeteners. But as far as safety goes, I don't think there's, I think the research is pretty conclusive as far as like cancer, neurological issues, disorder. Artificial sweeteners don't play a role in that. We'd have to consume an insane amount of them to actually have any kind of carcinogenic or other neurotoxic type effect. How can people take control when the buffet effect happens? Oh boy. Usually it helps to have a plan. I usually say if you're going to go to a buffet, I love buffets because there's choice and I can usually find minimally processed foods and take the proportions of things that I want. I usually say get one plate. Even if you get a large plate, whatever you get, you're going to get one plate, you're going to sit down, and that's your meal. It's a normal restaurant, you just get to pick up front. Part of that is just kind of making that behavior change happen. If you're like, yeah, I finished my plate, but I just can't stop myself. I would suggest going to see a dietitian, or there's some stuff online. You can look up there's some free information. If you Google intuitive eating, there are a lot of principles and kind of activities you can go through to help retrain yourself to eating until satiety, but not overeating and having some sense of control. A lot of people that tend to overeat, especially in those free eating situations, it's because this is of course very generalized, it depends on the individual, but it's because they're relatively restricted most of the time, and when they get in that environment where they have unrestricted access, they find it difficult to control themselves. Their dietary restraint is relatively low. And a lot of that's more of a psychological launch rather than a physiological, like, I need to eat more food. It's, no, you're just unrestricted and you're kind of, it's taken so much effort for the restriction for the last week or two that now that you're in the buffet and you can overeat, it tends to get away from them. But again, it could be 5 different reasons. So it might help to look online for intuitive eating or talking with the dietitian maybe to kind of find some strategies that can work. What trends have you seen due to COVID? A lot of weight gain. A lot of people, with soldiers especially, especially during the quarantine, a little bit less so now, they had more time in their hands, and this is people in general, more time in the hands. They didn't want to go out shopping, or they were maybe scared to go to the store and shop, so they got food delivered, or they just ate snack food, so they ate less fresh things. They didn't cook as much. It's amazing, like people have more time in their hands, but kind of becoming a little more complacent, and it's just easier to stay up late and snack and not have the lack of a normal schedule makes it harder to have a scheduled set of breakfast, lunch, dinner. I'm cooking, I'm meal prepping, and doing whatever. So that's obviously not everybody, but there were a lot of people that gained the COVID-15. Currently, things are relatively normal as far as like people that I talked to about willingness to go shopping and cooking and kind of being back to a relatively normal schedule. Let's see, next question. I didn't change my diet, but I worked out every day, and in 28 days, I didn't lose any weight. This explains a lot. The comment, yeah, it very well could be something related to that energy constraint model. I'm sorry I missed it, but how can we get a copy of these slides? I believe Shani, she was helping me set everything up. Either her or one of the other people administrating the presentation can send it your way. Shani, you?
Yes, we'll be providing all the slides. They'll be in the files portion of we can put it in nutrition. We'll put it in the nutrition tab.
I've already uploaded it.
Yes, we'll put it in the nutrition section of the Fit channel in the files. And so you'll have it in the recording and everything. And the recording will also be available for you.
Great.
Does that answer your question?
Thanks. Okay. Thanks. All right, I only got a few more, so I'll just plow through here. Let's see. Oh, yep, some links to where to find that info. 2 more questions. What are some resources to help begin tracking macros? Generally, so if someone wants to track like how many grams of carbs, fats, proteins, how many calories am I getting, you can use measuring cups to try to measure out things. I usually recommend getting a scale. You can even get like a $10, $15 like food scale and measure things in grams. So like, for example, there's like a half a cup of oatmeal is 40 grams. So I'm like, okay, let me get my half cup. I scoop it out and I pour it into a little bowl in the scale, and it's like 45 grams. Like, oh wow, that's like an extra, 30 calories, 40 calories. So it's hard to estimate. Now, if you're like fine with estimating and you generally do it the same way, that's fine. But if you really want to kind of get more of a specific idea and you really wanted to track grams of carbs, proteins, fats, and whatnot, I would say get a food scale. And at least that'll help get you used to visually seeing how much portions are. And then as far as that, just any free program online, I like something called Chronometer. I think I can type it in here. Chronometer. There's a free version online. There's also like MyFitnessPal. There's some other. There's like literally 50 different calorie counter things. Chronometer is kind of nice. I like the interface. They use the USDA database, and they generally do not allow people to have unregulated submissions. So if you go on MyFitnessPal, some people can just type in their own copies of foods, and it's pushed out as an option for, in searches for, say you search for something, it might come up. And what I like about Chronometer, at least, is that they have pretty good regulation over sort of official government databases of foods for carbs, fats, proteins. But if you plug it into some software, then that will allow you to see your meal and daily totals without having to like calculate it by hand. All right, can you recommend a modified plate for someone with kidney disease who needs to restrict protein intake but also lose weight? I'm obliged to say that I cannot give medical advice to people that I am not personally overseeing. What I can say is that if you look up online, any dietitian that you talk to should have access to some of the resources. You can also Google, as long as it's from like I forget the name of it. Basically, there's like the Heart, Lung, and Kidney Institute or whatever, or like the American or the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. If they have resources through their official websites for that, that might be a place to start on your own. But I would recommend getting more personalized medical feedback on that.
Me.
All right, I think that's all the questions.
All righty, Dr. Cain, thank you so much. That was really robust, and I learned a lot. So I know that some other questions, as people watch the recording, they'll probably have some more to fire up. But join us on Wednesday. Tomorrow. Tomorrow, that is correct.
Oh.
But tomorrow, Dr. Cain has another presentation that he'll be going over. So he'll be able to follow up and answer any questions that may come up later. All righty, hold on, let me bring you up. I'm still learning Microsoft Teams, by the way. All right, we're sending you live. All right. So I just want to say thank you, and again, we'll see you tomorrow, and hope everyone enjoyed it, all right? Have a great day.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for everybody that watched.